Good morning, Monday, March 28th, 2022. Ed Larkham here, and this is Simple Human Action. And in this episode, I'd like to take a look at the relationship between sound money and governance. And how does one define governance? It can be defined as the manner or system by which entities or peoples are directed or controlled. There's an important difference between the relationship between currency and governance and sound money and governance. So what am I driving at here? The point is this: sound money provides limitations on both a government's pervasive growth and inflation of the money supply. Without this limiting factor, there is a reduced ability by the public to restrict the processes of governance. So the nature of money is directly related to the nature of governance, and in fact it might be more relevant to say that the nature of governance is directly related to the nature of currency. This is a very important relationship to consider between sound money, fiat money, and governance. And this was a point not lost on the men who were the proponents of the Federal Reserve in 1913. And those who ensured that the final conclusion of the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 would result in the US dollar becoming the world's first reserve currency. In the previous episode, we've taken a look at the means through which government has seized control of the currency and essentially redesigned it to fit their purposes. Fiat money is now the plaything of governments across the West and indeed around the world. For over a century, the peoples of Western countries have known little else and have no reference point for anything different. There was, however, a time when people had aspirations that do not fit with today's political narrative. This is something that is extremely timely to review in terms of how it affects all of our lives every day. Unfortunately, I don't now know anyone who was out and about in the world in the late 1800s. So it appears we have little direct experience of economies driven by sound money, except through historic documentation. As we cautiously make our way through 2022, it may be instructive to review a worn-out cliché summed up as the American dream. This, of course, in many ways translates universally to the Western ideal, as it embraces the ideas of a free society and free economies. And this idea takes us back to the earliest days of the United States. The aspirations of the people in the US in the late 1700s, and indeed France, were to revolutionize governance essentially by the people, for the people, with sovereignty resting in the people. Thomas Paine's ideas and contributions to both the United States Constitution and the French Republic were to turn the monarchical and aristocratic hierarchy on its head. His Rights of Man, and of course his letter to Lafayette, published in 1791-1792, laid out a philosophy that was to lay the groundwork for the end of authority of an undeserving hierarchy in terms of control and serfdom, and the opportunity for people to progress by their own efforts in the absence of the shackles of serfdom. If I may, I would like to share a paragraph from the Rights of Man. It is a reflection about where sovereignty rests within a nation and the financial implications therein. The French Constitution says that the right of war and peace is in the nation. This was written in 1792. Where else should it reside but in those who are to pay the expense? In England, this right is said to reside in a metaphor shown at the Tower for sixpence or a shilling apiece, the crown jewels. So are the lions, and it would be a step nearer to reason to say it resided in them, for in any inanimate metaphor is no more than a hat or a cap. We can all see the absurdity of worshipping Aaron's molten calf or Nebuchadnezzar's golden image, but why do men continue to practice themselves the absurdities they despise in others? It may with reason be said that in the manner of the English nation is represented, it signifies not where this right resides, whether in the crown or in the parliament. War is the common harvest of all those who participate in the division and expenditure of public money. In all countries, it is the art of conquering at home. The object of it is an increase of revenue, and as revenue cannot be increased without taxes, a pretense must be made for expenditures. In reviewing the history of the English government, its wars and its taxes, a bystander not blinded by prejudice nor warped by interest would declare that taxes were not raised to carry on wars, but that wars were raised to carry on taxes. Now that makes you think, doesn't it? Please feel free to draw the similar connection between the autocracies and plutocracies of which Paine writes and our own times. Sir William Stevenson, the Canadian who was largely responsible for the creation of the British Security Coordination before and during the Second World War, was to reflect after the war that democracy, as it was understood, was extremely delicate, and he asked the question, will democracies consent to their own survival? So this now becomes the question of our time, as one reflects upon how the roots of authoritarianism have been grasping hold, gradually but surely, year by year. But public complacency is now the problem as much as is governance. Okay, enough digressing. I must keep to the subject. And what is the subject? Of course, it is what is the nature of governance that embraces sound money. Sound money, backed by a stable store of value, can be shown to be a panacea for a government-created monetary inflation, being the unbridled expansion of the currency supply. Paine's model of government, as embodied by the United States after the Declaration of Independence, is the model of bottom-up government and the absence of an authoritarian hierarchy. It is based on community-based municipal bodies to ensure community services and social responsibilities, to provide a safety net for those who should need it. Consider this as you reflect upon the homelessness of California's largest cities, the social malaise in Paris, and rising crime rates across all the Western countries, all a symptom of the deprivation caused by the apathy of a far-removed government and the passivity of a public that cannot begin to understand the causes. In conclusion, I'd just like to share a small reflection by Alexis de Tocqueville. In 1834, he published his work, Democracy in America. He came from France to the United States to evaluate the fruits of the early decades of independence and the new form of government that was founded in the sovereignty of the people. It is very enlightening and in reflection of our current times. The concept of where sovereignty rests is as equally important as the concept of sound money. And as you listen to these words, close your eyes and look around the world with your mind's eye and decide for yourself if these words echo loudly through the ages. Democracy in America by Tocqueville. A good read when you can't sleep at night. This is chapter 4, the principle of sovereignty of the people of America. Whenever the political laws of the United States are to be discussed, it is with the doctrine of the sovereignty of the people that we must begin. the principle of the sovereignty of the people, which is always to be found more or less at the bottom of almost all human institutions, generally remains there, concealed from view. It is obeyed without being recognized, or if for a moment it is brought to light, it is hastily cast back into the gloom of the sanctuary. The will of the nation. It's one of those phrases that have been most largely abused by the wily and the despotic of every age. Some have seen the expression of it in purchased suffrages of a few of the satellites of power, others in the votes of a timid or an interested minority, and some have even discovered it in the silence of a people, on the supposition that the fact of submission established the right to command. That's what one might call the approval of the silent majority. In America, the principle of the sovereignty of the people is neither barren nor concealed, as it is with some other nations. It is recognized by the customs proclaimed by the laws. It spreads freely and arrives without impediment at its most remote consequences. If there is a country in the world where the doctrine of the sovereignty of the people can be fairly appreciated, where it can be studied in its application to the affairs of society, and where its dangers and its advantages may be judged, that country is assuredly America. America, and indeed the West, has morphed into something far removed from these ideals today. It will require a most concerted effort to regain the political ideals of a former age and to restore economic health, opportunity, and the ideals of freedom and liberty for ourselves, and especially for those who shall come after us. And on that bombshell, I will leave you in peace. Thank you so much for listening, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the subscribe button and the like button, and I'll look forward to chatting with you in the next episode.